Howdy. My name's Tyrone, One Right. Basically, I've made a few videos on here. Maybe check them out or something like that. But I'd like to address your video here. Is excellent, man. You make a lot of good points that I agree with, but on another point, you ignore a lot, or you're naive about a lot. And that's not to say that you're stupid or ignorant or whatever. Actually, ignorant would be a good word. It's just more to say that I think you're overlooking something for the simple pleasure of it. Now, you say that, okay, we're employing people through broadband and whatnot over in India or poor countries and whatnot, and that money will trickle down. What's being fed into those countries is US dollars. And those US dollars, while, yeah, they are, putting American economy out there, that's imperialistic, by the way, those people go and become consumers with that money to buy things that they need. So they buy things at Walmart and they buy things at different stuff like that, that then recycle into the American economy. Ultimately, the governments that they are dealing with are forced to compete with the American economy or lay down, basically. So, in essence, it's either compete or assimilate. So basically what happens is these different countries, they get the money and then they end up buying different, American economic things, or America buys from them and whatnot. That's as long as those countries are providing to them. They have some kind of trade that they have to provide. Now, if we're talking about countries that don't have that particular ability to trade, then where do they start? Well, we can put American companies in there and it'll help them. No, unless you wanted to make it an American country. Like if you wanted to assimilate it into America, it won't work. What needs to happen is they need to come up with needed ideas, needed fields that are available for them to provide, so sugarcane, metal, or something like that, or even something in the technology world, and they need to develop that. But the problem is they don't have the money to make a strong enough provision of that. They don't have enough money to create a strong enough background for their economy, so they can compete with this worldview. They don't have the ability to do so because they don't have the correct funds. So what happens is they ask for money from the IMF or World Bank. But what the IMF and World Bank then do is ask them, well, if we're going to lend you money, you have to have free trade with us. You have to trade with us. But the problem is, then they don't have enough time to build up that particular issue, and they don't have enough time to make it a strong enough field within their own country to conveniently provide it. Therefore, they end up failing really quickly because of all the debt that they've been put into with all of this money they've been lent. Just like America's in. What they need to do actually is create a centralized bank and build up a lot of money to do that and have a cushion, just like America has the pleasure of. So they don't have that ability because they're in debt right off the get-go. So what they need to do, and by the way, the World Bank and IMF are associated with all of the banks in America, the Federal Reserve. If you look and do all your research, they're all associated. So America doesn't really have this problem. They have the problem of being an imperial economic empire and managing everything. So if this country that is not, wealthy enough to develop these, what's the word I'm looking for, these industries, then they borrow money to do it, or they have this idea and they make a really crap job of it, and they sell the idea to America, so Americans can develop it. But then, how does that provide to the country or government itself so it can successfully compete on this economic worldview? They absolutely can't, because it's not being done with them. It's being done as an American thing. So ultimately, you're just promoting a poverty-stricken country being poor unless they submit to American policy. I don't see any fairness in that at all whatsoever. There's no freedom. It's all completely join us or die. You know what I mean? We want freedom, right? And what needs to be done, because if you look, even us in our current world, like in Canada and in the United States, I'm in Toronto, by the way, as well, If you look in Canada, we have this exact same problem. What happens is you've got JP Morgan and Chase, and you've got all these rich fellas at the top, they have all of this power, and they're the ones, JP Morgan, not David Rockefeller, that's old John D. Rockefeller, Paul Warburg, go look up all those names. Around the time of Woodrow Wilson created the Federal Reserve Act, and they had all of their banks and all this money, and they created a centralized bank around 1913, after, I think it was Warburg went over to, or no, it was Aldrich went over to Germany in 1913 and saw their centralized bank and was like, I like this way of being. Came back over here and said, well, let's do this. And then all of these powerful men with all of the money, Rockefeller had Standard Oil Company, and they came together and said, let's start the centralized bank. We've got all of this money. Let's start managing things. Let's be the big bosses. Now, that creates an unequal class. And America was built on equality, first and foremost. So now that they've got this unequal class, they've eventually merged all of their banks and stuff. If you look into the history of JP Morgan Chase, Chase was owned by Aldrich, whose daughter married J.D. Rockefeller's daughter, and now you've got David Rockefeller, and it's absolutely this huge one-tier thing with all of the workers underneath. And we are basically, what's going on is because we've got the IMF and World Bank up there, and they loan this centralized bank money at an interest per dollar. And basically, actually, it's you pay back the dollar plus interest when they loan it to you. So where does the money come to pay this back? From them. So that's how inflation comes. So $1 becomes worth less, therefore they get more and more and more money at the top tier, and they end up getting trillions and trillions of dollars, but then people at the bottom stay at the bottom, and the people at the top go even higher. So that basically traps a working class at the bottom, and there is no equality. So we're stuck in this tier, and we're trying to apply it to other countries and force them into that exact same situation, which is absolutely preposterous. I completely disagree. Now, I will say you are 100% right that corporate entities, and that is all those people running those things, like Rothschilds and the Warburgs and all of that, need to say, listen, we need to actually use our money and distribute it correctly so it is not so concentrated, because we need a legitimate balance in order for things to legitimately work. And so we're forced to have, what's happened is we're forced to have different corporations fend for themselves. Like a bunch of people have gotten together and, okay, we've got Walmart, now let's build ourselves and make a group for ourselves, and now we're respected in society. Now we're a part of that class. It's a private corporation, corporative entity. So that's what capitalism does. And then you've got this whole segregation between classes. And now you've got Walmart, who provides to us, but we're still poor, and we're still striving to make ends meet. But we feel okay because they use the media to calm us, and then they say, well, listen, this person over here in this country is threatening us, so let's make this story and everybody will be on our side. And it just proliferates like that. So the problem really stands exactly where you said, where corporations and consumers together need to say, well, listen, we want to create a more sustainable situation here. And that doesn't just stem on energy and consuming. It stems on actual sustainable environments in an economic worldview. Maybe this sounds like socialism, communism, but I think from what we've learned from democracy and capitalism enough can be implemented into communism in perhaps maybe a more Marxist type worldview. It would be a little different because, well, anything that's slightly different wouldn't be called Marxism anymore. But anyways, it needs to proliferate into something like that in order for all of the countries to enjoy a sated, free environment. Otherwise, will be entirely imperialistic, and the freedom that people have will be entirely imposed upon them, and it won't exactly be free because it will be conditional on what America wants or whatever country. So we need to really focus on what is going on there in the top tier and say, listen, we're not having any of that. We need some true answers here. Thank you.